So I'll break it into two chunks. I'll talk about the cost first, and then I'll talk about the MOQ, the minimum order quantities, and then I'll kind of try to put them together. So if you actually look at most brands, and if you kind of dig deep and find out why they've gone bust, you will see that very often it's problems that are triggered to do with either costing, wrong costing, not making enough money, etc., or lack of finance because they're sitting on too much stock, or combination of both. So getting that combination of the right cost and MOQ, you know, how much you commit to work with a factory is really important. So cost. One mistake that I see when I work with brands, one of the mistakes that I see as soon as we start is that they have the price that they have set really wrong, because very often when they start, there's not a lot of information about fashion pricing out there. People price it based on where they want to be. So I want to be, you know, I want my competitor to be XYZ, and they price their product there, and then they scramble backwards and try to make it work. And very often what happens is that they're so committed to that idea that they want to launch and that price, that they're not seeing the logic and how it all works together. So by the time they launch it and somehow they figured out and gotten to that price by hook or by crook, they don't realize that most probably they're selling it at a loss or breaking even at best. So people are not really focused on the profit margin they're making. So instead, the right way to do it is to, when you have an idea and you kind of have an idea also where you want to position it, is then to, you know, find who's the ideal client for this idea. Because if you did the research, maybe your ideal client doesn't want you to do a product like this, or maybe while you're talking to them and trying to find who's your ideal perfect client for that idea, maybe in that process you actually optimize your idea, or you spot that there's gaps somewhere else that would allow you to create a product, not only that you'll be able to sell and it will be successful, but to charge a price which would allow you also to make profit. So being aware of why your product exists and where you're positioned and who your competitors, etc., and who your ideal client is, who's the person who's going to buy this, is like really important starting point for setting your price. Then the next thing that you need to do is, in order to get your pricing right, is really important to decide how you're going to sell. Now, since internet started, what is it, I don't know, 30 years or something like that, there are two ways to sell. There's direct to your consumers, or there's wholesale. And how you decide to sell is really important in the way you're going to structure your price. You can do both, but if you decide to sell only straight down to the consumer, it potentially cuts you out from going wholesale, simply because there are smaller margins that you would apply to selling directly to a consumer versus to a wholesale. Because when you're wholesaling, you have to put profit on top of your cost price of the product, then sell it at that price, let's say X, to your wholesaler, and then the wholesaler will put their own margin then on top in order to get the recommended retail prices, it's called in the US, or in the UK, and in the US it's something similar. So retailers, depending on the category, whether it's clothing, accessories, jewelry, etc., retailers tend to use a different markup number, but by and large, it's anything between 2 times for fine jewelry. So don't hold on to this because you'll be in trouble, but fine jewelry is marked up 2 times by shops if they were to buy you, to anything 3 times plus, depending. Big retailers, they take bigger cut because they invest more in you, etc., so they want more. So pricing, assuming a price point markup, if you're wholesaling that's on the higher end, protects you, because it allows you, if you work with someone big or even a smaller boutique who is putting you in a situation where perhaps they're asking for a discount in order to buy you, it allows you that buffer to give them that discount to get in. So, so knowing about this and making a decision from the beginning how you want to sell is really important, because if you decide to only sell direct to consumer, it's easier. You only, you know, multiply by whatever amount of time it is you want to, whatever profit you want to make, and then you sell to your customers, and that's it. Then you're in charge. But if you wholesale, it's a different conundrum. You can do both, but you just have to be careful that you don't undersell on, with a lower margin directly to your customers, because that would really upset your wholesalers and they will stop buying from you. So if you are wholesaling, you have to sell everything at that price point. So so getting to that is a little bit tricky, and getting your prices right is like an exercise that it just doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. You don't just like get the calculator, do it, and that's it, done. It's a constant back and forth. You check out your competitors, you see what your prices are. Can you sell it for a little bit more? Sometimes you would have products in your collection where you have bigger margin for something, even though it costs you less to make, and you're making bigger profit margin. Or you have other products that you'll be barely making anything, but they're important to have in your collection because perhaps they're pushing business to the other products where you're making more. So it's never clean cut, it's never black and white and really simple. So it's really important to do that and to understand how your price is structured. Another mistake people do is that when they design something over the top, something with beautiful materials, etc., but they want to sell it at, let's say, lower high street level, etc., it's just you're never going to make margin. You're never going to make profit. It's just impossible. So when you start evaluating your pricing, you can go two ways. You can either, if you are really strongly married to the idea of this product that you want to make, and the price is not matching, you just cannot get it made for that price, then you have to start elevating. You have to find new customers who will buy it at that higher price point. You have to elevate your marketing in order to to be able to sell it at a higher price point, etc. Or if you really want to be at a certain market and you want to sell product at that level and have XYZ competitors, then you have to start eliminating from your product just to get it to that price point. So in the email today, I sent you a link to the calculator that I created some time back, and it's a very rough, it's a literally, rough calculator just to give you an idea based on how much you want to sell something, what the cost should be. It's by no means set in stone, but it just gives you an idea, because very often you just don't know how to get to that place. And you don't have a realistic idea of what your product should cost. So that makes you to think, to realize that if you want to sell something at £100 and you want to wholesale, the cost has to be minuscule. And if that is not realistic, and because you want to use expensive materials and you want to make a few only pieces and you want to maybe manufacture in the UK or something, something's got to give. You can't have it all. So it's just to get you to think about it. But it's fairly accurate at the same time as well. If you were to take it and say, oh my God, this is the price, you're not going to be far wrong. So that is about cost. So it's really important that you know your numbers, that you, I'm someone who hates numbers. I'm scared of numbers. But when you have a product, you just need to know all your numbers, all your little costs, how much is this costing you, that costing you, if you have a pocket on a shirt, how much extra is it adding? Very often when I develop products with clients, we would, develop the initial idea as a prototype, get an initial costing, and if it's really far off, we start thinking, what can we eliminate? Is it the lining that is more expensive? Can we do a cheaper lining? Can we eliminate a pocket? What if we take away the zip? There's all these little things that can help you get to a better price. Or you might decide this is absolutely beautiful and I'm just going to sell it at a higher price point and I'm going to, market it in a different way, etc. So there's ways, but you have to be open and really know your numbers, and at every point know if it's costing you X, what are you going to sell it at Y, and what's your profit? Because profit is the money you make in between, is not only what's going to potentially pay your salaries and other costs, etc. But if you can afford for that to be reinvested back in the business, that's the only way you're going to grow. You are never going to grow a business if you're constantly growing it out of your pocket, so that's it. And the reality is the reality that most designers don't talk about is that actually even successful brand designers that are growing small, let's say people that are showing at New York Fashion Week, British Fashion Week, etc., what they don't tell you is that initially for the first few years, and it takes a good amount of years, they're not profitable. They might also never be profitable. But what happens, the way they sustain their businesses, is that once they get a bit of reputation, they consult for other brands. You know, I don't want to name any names, but, you know, big designers that I know, without advertising it, they're designing the swimwear for another brand, or they're designing a line of bags or something for another brand without mentioning their name, just getting the consultancy fee, or they're consulting here, or they're giving some lectures there. They're always finding ways to bring in cash into the business because they don't really want to compromise on the design and on where they want to be, but they cannot, you know, they're not at a level where they can generate prices to allow them to sell at acceptable price point that people will buy and make profit. So, you know, they just can't tick all of these boxes. So until they perhaps increase their volume of production orders, whereby they can start reducing costs of production of raw materials, etc., they need to also live and you know, and eat and breathe and hire people and offices, etc. And if they can't take this money from their profit, they have to bring in cash from the side. So again, but they can only do that when they know how much money really the business is getting. So that's about cost. Now, the MOQ, or the minimum order quantities, this is there in place by factories because they have businesses to run, right? They're just a business like any other. And if they were working with no minimum order quantities and they were big, they would be running around like headless chickens, and there'll be no structure, no organization, etc. And that would lead to their demise. So what happens is that very often you meet two types of factories. Factories who are smaller, like them, a lot of the UK factories are like this. You ask them what is your minimum, and they say there's no minimum. One, for instance, or no minimum, etc. And that's great. If you're starting out, it's great to work with factories like this, but you need to understand that you're paying a little bit more. And you're also perhaps working with smaller factories where, I'm not saying they're disorganized, but there are factories that are less organized because, you know, 1 minute they're working on someone with one piece, which is going to take them, you know, an unforeseen amount of time to develop. Next minute they're, you know, making a little order of 10 pieces. Next, you know, if someone comes with 50, and they might drop everyone else just to do the 50 because that might be better, bring them better cash flow, etc. Ultimately, all factories want to have more business. And the smaller factories, when they don't have minimum order quantities, very often they're in that place where they're always saying yes to work because they're scared of when the next piece, you know, of work, next customer will come. And that's a horrible place to be when you're manufacturing, because you have no security that you're not going to be dropped at the sight of someone with a bigger order than you. So by contrast, the bigger factories that are better organized, that have more people to pay, you know, more customers, etc., they have introduced this MOQ. Because that allows them to cut off a whole bunch of people who perhaps, you know, are not the right type of customer. So by having an MOQ, they're really attracting the right customer for them. So that's one. What it's secondly allowing them is that it's allowing them to schedule their production better, because by knowing that they would always get at a minimum an order of, I don't know, say 200 pieces, etc. They know roughly how long 200-piece order will take, and they can start planning their schedule of calendar. And if someone, you know, with a bigger order, let's say someone comes with 1,000 pieces, given what they already have on their calendar, they might say, okay, in that case, we need, you know, a couple more people. It's so much easier to forecast and predict and find 2 extra people to jump in on a line in order to fulfill this order and not, you know, upset the apple cart with all the other orders, than to really not know who's coming, what quantities, etc. It also allows them, when there's a minimum order quantity, it allows them also to give you a better pricing, because they know that for X amount of time, let's say someone is stitching 200 pieces of the same shirt, that is 200 units that are going to go through them, by which point they will really learn how, you know, the stitching goes. They would get into a flow. It would cut down the time of manufacturing. They're not going to be, when you have a small order or 1 or 2 pieces, you know, the time you spend on changing the thread on your machine, it's lost time. It's time that, you know, it's difficult. I mean, no, actually, it's not difficult to monetize because you include it in the price, but that is where you end up paying more, because you're paying for someone taking their time to change the thread, etc., etc. So when you have a bigger order with a bigger factory, it's better organized and it's better priced because it's more time efficient. And let me see what else. I've made some notes. These factories, when they have MOQs, usually the way, the standard way of presenting minimum order quantities is per style, per color. Okay, so if you go to a factory, you're making a shirt and you want it in 3 colorways, and you say, what is your minimum order quantity? And they say it's 200. It's best to clarify, oh, is it 200 per style or per color? Often they would say per color because they want a bigger order. They always know that most people have more than one color. But because the industry is so personal, once you develop a relationship with them, once you talk to them, etc., that would bend. That would move away, and it would be like per style. And they would then say, perhaps you can have 2 or 3 styles. They don't really want you. They rather be stricter at the beginning so that you learn, not to take advantage of them. So then if they say it's by style, and then you ask them, oh, but, can I please, have a couple of colorways, etc., they would accept a couple. But if there wasn't that rule, you would probably turn up and say, well, actually, I would like 10, 20 colorways within the minimum of 200. And then they're back to square one. They're changing threads, they're changing things because you might be changing buttons, etc. You might have different detailing. So it's a mess. So it's very simple. They say, this is our minimum, it's per style. But I want you to know that within that, you can more often than not include some colorways. Now, the danger with this, and that's where it comes together with the costing, is that when you obviously work with a factory like this and you have a higher volume, a minimum requirement, compared to a factory that wouldn't, you would probably get better prices. Just like when you're buying a bulk material rather than 1 or 2 meters from a shop, etc., you would get a better price. So the danger is sometimes is to say, okay, well, if I go into this factory, I know they're asking for 500 units. I had once someone contact me and wanted to manufacture in China, something super simple, but she was new, she had no sales channel. And she was like, I want to go to China because I'm going to get the price. And I was like, but how are you going to sell 500 units? I mean, it's, it might sound like it's easy, but it's not so easy in this competitive market with no name, etc., to just like out of the blue go out and sell 500. So the mistake a lot of people make is that they think, well, I'll figure it out. I'm going to sell it, but hey, at least, I'm meeting the right price and I'm going to make my profit, or et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is that they struggle and they don't sell. I've had clients who, have come to me and they are sitting on so much stock. That's money. They're sitting, and then they have problems. They don't have money to go to a show. They don't have money for a next production, etc. And there's like all these problems that come from just one single thing, that they are sitting on overstock that they committed to falsely under the false pretense that they will sell it, but that allows them to, meet the target price point they had to meet, etc. And now all of a sudden they can't move forward. So the alternative is really to, by knowing your costs, and going into this with your eyes open, to perhaps say, you know what, this season or for this collection, I will break even, or I will make like something really small, 10, 20% or whatever, but at least I know it's that small. But I will go with a small factory, and it would probably be more time on your side because you may have to organize all your materials, etc. You might have to supervise them more. But you will get less units. You would go out and sell them, and with the money you make, etc., you would learn so many lessons just by selling this. You would go the next time, and after a few goes like this, if everything goes right, you start getting confident. You start getting more customers. You start increasing your orders, and by this point, I mean, first of all, you should always have a plan B. You should always be checking out factories and knowing what's the next factories you're going to be working with. When you get bigger, you reach a certain milestone, etc., what's the next factory? But once you get there, just move your production. Perhaps if you really enjoy working with this one factory and you don't want to leave them in the dumps, you can develop a small line or something new where you keep them going, or you do something bespoke or a higher price point where you sell less of, etc. There's so many ways. There's so many opportunities and ways of working with factories once you have a little bit more bigger production orders, and once you also know where you are with your costs. You absolutely know every single penny, how to account for it, etc. And once you meet these minimums, you just move to another factory. and that is it. So cost and minimum order quantities is really important. So even if you're afraid of numbers like me, just focus on it and break it down and just know. If you're not making money, just know. And I want you also to know that it's okay at the beginning if you're launching or if you've just started or if you're a young brand, it takes good few years to start making money. And sometimes, fashion is fickle. Sometimes, after many, many years in business, you still don't make money. Why do big brands, if you think about it, how do they make money? They make money through licenses, perfumes, glasses, you name it. These are all licenses that someone is paying them for next to nothing, a lot of money, just to sell extra products with their name. That's how they make money. So sometimes starting a fashion business, it's just a vehicle for you to grow and create a name that you can then leverage and make money in other ways, and not necessarily through your passion or whatever it is, making clothes. So just be aware of this, because also another thing is that, if you go down the wholesale route, that's like a whole other conversation, but most buyers don't buy young brands at least for 3 seasons. They just watch them. So you really need to not commit to too much stock, know your numbers, and and be prepared to figure out how much money are you going to have to make you last at least 3 seasons. It could be even longer, but during these 3 seasons, you have to keep on going, because those brands, if you want to wholesale, all these retailers watching you, they're actually watching you. If they're interested in you, they want to watch you. They want to see how you're developing. The reason they're not buying you is because they want to make sure that you're evolving. They want to make sure that there's a next collection and you meet the deadlines of the collection, and you are consistent with your design signature, with your pricing, etc., etc. So they're watching you for a reason, so that when they buy you, they're sure that you're not going to let them down. Because when they commit to buy you, they put an investment in them talking to their clients, presenting you, explaining who you are. It's going to take a bit of time for you to sell to their clients. All of that is time and investment on their side. So you have to, if you want to build a fashion brand, you have to know your numbers. Don't overcommit on stock, start small, keep going, and have a plan B. How are you going to keep this brand going for a few seasons until people get to know you and want to buy you? So let me just see, Mita, you have a question. Looking for a full service factory for vegan bags, but the factories in China have such. That's it, yes. China is not what Mita used to be. So China, people used to go there, some years back, I think around 2008 and 9, so many brands moved production to China because it was cheaper. And yes, it was high volume, but it was cheaper. And after the recession, when so many brands went bust and people were not willing to spend so much money and everyone was discounting, the only way to make something was, to reduce your prices, but brands still had to sustain some kind of profit. So a lot of them were moving to China to manufacture cheaper. But since then, China has elevated as a country. Their standard of life has risen, their bills have risen, etc. So China is no longer A, cheap, and B, the minimum quantities. I actually at one point thought that, as they're increasing their prices, surely they're going to reduce their minimum order quantities. But that never happened. And they don't need to, in a way, because their country is so massive, and there's so many other big brands, whatever big brands are left out there, still working with the successful factories. They don't have to, and the less successful factories, they manufacture for the internal market, just like in India. These are such vast countries with so many levels of cities and tiers of cities that, in the West, we kind of can't comprehend, and they always have work, so if you're doing something, I don't exactly know what you're doing. Perhaps drop me a message in the group. But if you're doing something that you're price conscious, but it's a designer level or something, there's other factories. Maybe China is just not the way for you. And there's other countries like Turkey, for instance, have lower minimums, and it's closer to go to, etc. Portugal, perhaps, Spain, certainly. So China is not the only answer.